I am Chaiya Herberger, playing the role of Katie Couric for this interview, and I am pleased to be sitting here with the Mayor of Lakewood, Mayor Michael Summers. Good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
Mayor Summers. I'm so glad you're taking the time to speak with me today. Let's begin with, when you were young, did you want to be the Mayor of Lakewood or work in a governmental position?
That's an interesting question. I certainly never saw myself as mayor, but I always, starting in about 8th grade, became interested in government. And where that was going to take me, I hadn't a clue, but I always thought it was very interesting. So, specifically mayor, no. Government, yes.
What is your role as mayor?
I make decisions. I make a lot of decisions. That's the primary job of the executive branch of government. Our job is to actually get things done and deliver services. For example, here in Lakewood, it's real important that we pick up your garbage on schedule. It's important that when the snow flies and covers your street with snow, we plow it. It's important that we pick up your leaves. It's important that we protect you with our police services. It's important if you call the fire department and your house is on fire that we show up in about 3 minutes. And if you need some medical help, it's important that we show up and as fast as we can get there. Better than 3 minutes is crucial. We maintain sewers. We maintain water systems. We maintain water meters. We maintain parks. Those are the services that our citizens in Lakewood expect this government to provide to them, and it's my job to make sure that we do. And if we have issues of complaints or concerns, it's my job to address them. And in order to do all this, we have to make a lot of decisions every day to keep things moving forward, and that's my job.
What is a typical day for you?
Typical day. Well, I usually get to this office by about 8 a.m., sometimes earlier. Usually it takes me about an hour to sort of sort through what will become hundreds of emails a day. And they're not all important, but many of them are, and one of the challenges is to figure out which ones are. So I generally have to look at some way or another at all of them to sort them all out, and then decide if it's a complaint, if it's a concern, if it's an important piece of information, if it's an invitation to attend a meeting, or some background information that's important, to absorb it, read it, understand it, and then put it in a place where I can act on it. So that takes a lot of time. And I would say this door in the mayor's office is always open, and directors who run the government come in informally all day long. Police chief will walk in, director of housing and economic development will walk in, the law director today has walked in, each with a different type of issue. We'll sit down at this table and we'll talk about the issue. So being available to the folks who work for this government and help them to do their jobs is a big part of the day. I visited a construction site down in the Metro Parks today, a new salt storage facility. Today I will close my day by going down to the police department, sort of checking in down there, making sure we're ready for the weekend. I answer a lot of phone calls from citizens and other constituencies. So, in a broad sense, it's a very sort of chaotic day, and it changes by the hour. And if there's a major event, such as Mother Nature or the big storm, especially this type of year, we look west out of this window and we watch very carefully and try and figure out, are we going to get snow? Is it going to be a windstorm? What do we need to do to make sure our snowplows are ready, make sure our drivers are on call, and make sure our equipment's capable of handling it? If we have to take special precautions, are we ready to do that? Who's in town? Which police and fire safety folks are going to be available on call, getting ready for a storm? Those are all parts of a normal day. So it's a very interesting day.
What resources do you use to prepare yourself to run a city?
Well, today we have a lot of advanced communication capabilities, and I would say one of the most compelling ones is basically online researchability. For example, today I was exploring a University of, or not a University of Akron, an Akron General Hospital wellness program that I'd heard about. So I was able to use Google to inquire about that program to learn more about it. So using online research tools are very helpful to me. Certainly sending emails is easy and quick, and that's a nice tool. There's a different time and place. Maybe 30 years ago in this office, I think there were 3 people with typewriters, and they would be banging away, sending letters all day long. And we would, but today we can handle all that electronically. So computers, telephones, internet are phenomenal tools for this office.
How would you describe your governing style?
That's an interesting question. And I do think about that. And it's really a function of my leadership style. I have a high trust to the folks who I work closely with, which would be the directors. I try and give them as clear a direction as I can. I listen carefully to them, and I give them an enormous amount of room to do the work. So I'm very hands-on in the sense that I want to understand how the government's performing, but I have a high tolerance for delegation to folks to do their duties. And I spend then a fair amount of time checking back with them just to stay in touch and asking if there's anything I can do to help them with any obstacles that are in their way to do what we agreed to do. So it's a very collaborative approach to working with the folks here.
What would you say has been your biggest failure as mayor?
That's an interesting question. Failure, I'm not so sure that I have perspective on that. If I had a do-over, if I would do something differently, in my first year, I think I got ahead of city council, too far out in front of them. And I was moving as rapidly as I thought was appropriate to deal with what was an impending financial crisis. And I didn't spend as much time circling back and making sure they understood what I saw and what I thought we needed to do. And there was a lot of anxiety and disgruntlement on their part that didn't need to happen if I'd done a better job. So I learned that lesson, and now spend more time checking in with City Council, who's a very important part of the government. City Council are the other side of the elected officials of government, and they have the responsibilities of controlling the money, the budget, and they also are the only ones that can pass a law. So I need to make sure that I stay in close touch with them and that I listen to them and not get too far out. So that was a mistake that I made, that I learned a hard lesson there.
What would you say has been your greatest success?
Well, I like to think that's an untold story because we've got a lot of subjects we're still working on. When I entered this office in 2011, there were several external threats to our ability to govern here. One was a budget proposed by our governor, John Kasich, that was going to take pretty close to 10% of our revenues away from us. So adjusting to that loss was a big challenge, and it took us about 3 years to do that. And we were able to do it in a very orderly way. So that's good news. We got clobbered by Hurricane Sandy. Adjusting to and dealing with it best that we can to protect our citizens in that situation was a challenge. We also had major challenges from the Environmental Protection Agency of the federal government, the U.S. government, and also the state of Ohio's government. And they were threatening lawsuits that would actually demand us to take certain actions that would require us to fix our sewers and in a manner that we didn't think was appropriate. So we had to engage pretty significantly and quickly and robustly to negotiate an outcome, and we were able to do that. And we also had a big lawsuit on a civil rights charge that was a major threat to us, and we were able to settle that lawsuit. So those are some of the bigger events, but I think threatening or staving off the threats from these outside forces were successful, and I think we were also able to maintain good service levels to our citizens, despite all that.
What lessons have you learned in your time as mayor?
Oh, I learn a lot, and I learn every day. I learn about the role of governing, and it's different. I come from a manufacturing environment, a private company environment, so decision-making in a private company environment is very different than here. In government, everybody has a seat at the table, everybody. Wherever you are, because government is fundamentally exists to serve its citizens. So they have a right to engage, and we want them to engage. So you have to be very, very patient and listen very carefully and thoroughly to everybody. And sometimes that takes a very long time, and sometimes it gets a little boring. But it's important, and so I've learned how to be more patient and listen more carefully. That's a lesson learned. Learning how to talk to the media is actually something I've never done before. So I've had a chance to talk to a lot of folks like you in your capacity as Katie Couric would do, and other reporters, and viewing their obligations to tell a story, and my obligations to tell a story to our citizens, and using their need and my need to communicate as a way to effectively get the message out. So I've learned that lesson too. I've learned to work with unions, which I hadn't done before, and I've learned about basically broader government agencies outside of Lakewood that have a big impact, such as the federal government, and how to work with them.
What advice would you give to someone wanting to pursue a career in politics?
Don't do it. No, actually, we need all the best talent we can to serve government. But you don't have to be a politician. I don't think of myself as a politician. I think of myself as a sort of a government steward, a servant. I came into this office in an unusual way, a non-political way, and so folks like me can show up and help government to perform at higher levels without being sort of the career-minded, I'm going to do things that will help me get elected regardless of whether it really helps the citizens or not. That's sort of the political side. Politics is a process. I see a lot of it. I engage in a lot of it. But I think what we really need is for all citizens to take a very healthy view of helping their government. But if you really wanted to do it seriously, I would say start locally and ask how you can help get involved with boards and commissions, which are appointed citizen roles that make very important decisions. Planning Commission, Architectural Board of Review, Board of Zoning Appeals. Those are all very, very important avenues of decision making that are made by folks like you and your parents and your neighbors. And you don't have to take a whole bunch of time to do it, and you can learn a lot about government and decide whether it fits you or not. So it's a good starting point. So I would say start locally, start getting involved, and see how you feel about it. And you can make a very meaningful role without even being elected.
What do you do in your downtime?
I like to exercise. Actually, this job requires me to be here all day long, and it generally requires me to be at an evening meeting at least 3 evenings a week. So weekends are my real downtime. And I like a real slow start to the day on weekends, where you can sort of think about what's going on. But I like to read. I like to take long walks. My children are all grown. They live in China, they live in Los Angeles, California, they live in Boston, Massachusetts. So keeping in touch with them is something I enjoy doing, and talking to my son in China, we have to talk to him at 8 in the morning, and it's 8 in the evening there, so we always forget to call him at 8, and then we remember at 10, and then it's 10 o'clock there, and he's in bed. So we have to work hard to stay in touch. So honestly, I don't have a whole lot of free time. But when I do, I think thinking about things, learning about things, and reading about things is what I do. I read a lot of magazines, I read a lot of newspapers. That takes a lot of time.
What newspapers and magazines do you read?
I read the Plain Dealer when it's delivered to my home, online when it's not. I read the Wall Street Journal every day. I read Time magazine. I read this great little magazine called The Week, which is a sort of a nice summary of world events. It gives you a pretty good overview in a short amount of time. I read some periodicals like actually this Wilson Quarterly, which was a political commentary, really a sort of a deep social commentary that sort of is pretty serious and not easy to read, but I sort of slug through it with some regularity. I watch some news shows, and that's probably it.
What is your position on climate change?
Well, I'm very worried about our climate. And I would say, from my perspective, it's very noticeable. The intensity of the storms that we are experiencing here in Lakewood, and I think here in the United States, and I think elsewhere in the world, are, in my opinion, documentable. That means they're clearly evident to me, and their havoc that they are raising on our world is noticeable. I worry mightily about the melting of the polar ice caps and the rising of the level of the oceans. And so as a result, the question is, what can each of us do? And here in Lakewood, there's a lot we're doing. We're actually looking at ways to capture our waste of methane from our wastewater treatment facility in generating enough electricity to actually drive the whole wastewater treatment facility, which is a very energy intensive process. So we do two things. We keep that methane from going into the atmosphere, and we actually use it to generate electricity, which saves us from having to buy energy from a coal-fired power plant. So that's an important element. We're exploring ways we can convert some of our gasoline-powered trucks to natural gas. We we're actually engaging in a lot of opportunities to decrease our electrical consumption in our buildings. We have a white roof on this building, which reflects actually the heat in the summer, which allows us to use less energy to cool it. We actually have put in some advanced idling control features on our heavy equipment to allow them to maintain their diesel engine performance and use less gas and therefore less pollution. We're installing new traffic signals in Lakewood to manage traffic flow more successfully, so there are fewer cars idling at red lights, which is a waste and an air pollutant. We have a significant amount of effort to try and clean up our wastewater and our stormwater and its impact on our watershed, Lake Erie and Rocky River in particular. We're going to be spending millions of dollars to be better stewards of clean water, and that doesn't deal necessarily with climate. Well, it does deal with climate change, but not necessarily global warming. But it is part of our environmental stewardship. And there's really about 4 or 5 other major elements that are important to our energy consumption and our energy management that allow us to, in Lakewood, say we're making a contribution. Another one of which is our tree and forestry canopy. 29% of Lakewood is covered by trees. We think that should be 39%. And we are vigorously planting 300 trees a year. The problem with that is it takes 20 years before we really get the benefit of those trees. But we need to start now. So there's a whole bunch of things that we're doing, and I'm very, very concerned about climate change and global warming especially.
Is Lakewood doing anything to address climate change locally?
Yeah, well, I think we just talked about most of those. There's probably a few more, but I think the list we just covered is pretty good list.
What do you envision in the future for Lakewood?
I think it's a very exciting time to be in Lakewood. I think it's a very exciting time to be in the Cleveland area right now. And I've spent almost all my life here, and I've gone through some pretty rugged times, both in the Cleveland area and I think Lakewood too. You know, in the 1990s, we were all facing some pretty challenging trends, but the trends are very exciting right now. And I would say the number one reason the trends are exciting is because of the group of 20 to 35-year-olds in this country are embracing urban living, and they are saving our cities left and right. And that's especially true here in Cleveland area and Lakewood also. So they bring a lot of vigor to our communities, and they really understand a non-car focused world and lifestyle. And that means they want stuff local. And in Lakewood, we can deliver on that promise very easily and perhaps better than most cities. So Lakewood looks to a very, very bright future. And it's going to be a very exciting time to be here. And I'm going to be in it, and I expect you will be too.
What is your strategy to make it happen?
Good question. Actually, we have 4 major focuses on that we think about every day, one of which is vibrant neighborhoods. We have to do everything we can to make sure that a house, a family on a street in Lakewood feels engaged and is confident to both stay here and invest here. We need to make sure that we continue to do all we can to grow the economy of this particular community we live in, and that does 2 things. One, it gives us enough resources to fund our government and withstand some of the strong winds that take financial capacity away from us. But it also brings lifestyle components that folks can buy things they need here and entertain themselves here and do it locally and do it without a car. So that's the economic development piece. The other piece is we need to be safe and secure. It's very important that when you wake up in the morning and you walk out your door, that you feel that you are in fact safe. And not only do you have to be safe, you have to feel safe. And that's a big challenge for us. And the last piece is sound governance. We have to be very good stewards of hard-earned taxpayer money and spend them as wisely and effectively as we can on the services that we talked about at the very beginning of this interview. So I think if we continue to do those things, we will be serving our citizens well.
Again, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure, and the questions I think are very important. I hope the citizens of Lakewood get a chance to hear your questions and my answers. So good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.